Good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the plenary of the second Counter-Terrorism Financing CTF Summit that held on the 10th of August 2016 in Sofitel, Nusa Dua, Bali, Indonesia.
First of all, on behalf of PPATK and AUSTRAC as the co-host of this event, may I extend a special welcome to the Honorable Michael Keenan, Minister for Justice, Minister assisting the Prime Minister on Counter-Terrorism Australia.
His Excellency A.M. Fahir, Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs Indonesia.
The Honorable Lieutenant General Sutioso, Head of State Intelligence Agency.
His Honorable Lieutenant General Sutioso, Head of State Intelligence Agency.
His Honorable Dr. Muhammad Yusuf, Head of PPATK.
His Honorable Paul Jeff Taufik, APM, CEO of AUSTRAC.
His Honorable Agus Santoso, Vice Head of PPATK.
The honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let us extend our deepest appreciation for your coming here on a beautiful island of Bali to attend the second CTF Summit.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, now begin this event, we would like to welcome Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs Indonesia to deliver his remarks. To His Excellency, Mr. A.M. Fahir, the floor is yours.
Honorable Michael Keenan, Minister for Justice, Minister assisting the Prime Minister on Counter-Terrorism Australia, Muhammad Yusuf. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. And may God the Almighty is always bestowing His blessing upon us all. First of all, I would like to welcome you in Bali. I hope you could enjoy the friendliness and hospitality as well as the unique natural beauty of this island. Your enthusiastic participation in the activities of this forum indicates that we are on the right track in our pursuit of effective discussion and solution to the issue of terrorism financing, which has become a global threat confronted by every country. The purpose of holding this second Counter-Financing Terrorism Summit are to bring together more than 150 leaders and experts in counter-terrorism financing and financial intelligence from around the world, and to work collectively among 25 countries to identify, understand, and counter threats posed by terrorism financing and foreign terrorist fighters. This CTF Summit is the sustainable progress from the first CTF Summit held in November 2015 in Sydney, Australia, co-hosted by PPATK and AUSTRAC as the cornerstone of strategic cooperation on countering terrorism financing. Co-hosting this summit reflects the priority from both government and the aforementioned issues, and hopefully it could foster shared commitment on counter-terrorism financing efforts, which is reflected in Sydney communique. This summit will bring the implementation of Sydney communique in regional countermeasures area through the following 4 working groups. A working group of regional risk assessment on terrorism financing, working group of financial intelligence information exchange, working group of regional educational tools on terrorism financing, and working group on information technology expertise. This summit will build upon the success of the inaugural CTF Summit held in Sydney by developing regional solutions to terrorism financing issues and risks through financial intelligence sharing. Part of this will include the delivery of the first regional terrorism financing risk assessment and a framework for collaboration and intelligence sharing on priority risks and threats. The summit will provide opportunities to work together to identify and understand the full extent of terrorism financing in our regions, collaborate and share knowledge on terrorism financing methodologies and instruments, share effective techniques to counter terrorist revenue and funding streams entering financial markets, and elevate public-private partnership to strengthen financial markets against terrorism financing and support regional and global security. This summit also encourages us to work together by developing a regional framework to produce the first regional risk assessment on terrorism financing risks, to improve financial intelligence sharing and analysis, and to contribute toward global strategies aimed for strengthening intelligence sharing approach to combat the financing of terrorist groups. In addition, financial intelligence units that are involved in this event could harness the forum for sharing knowledge on typologies and latest trends on terrorism financing and understanding the potential illicit use of emerging financial technologies. Moreover, FIUs may also explore more effective mechanisms on information exchange to adapt with ever-changing operative mode of terrorism financing. Lastly, financial intelligence units could also utilize this event to collectively engage with the private sectors to increase the awareness from the financial industry on terrorism financing risks. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates and participants, I hope this summit could become the forum for all of us to share our knowledge and experience on counterterrorism financing with high expectancy to establishing an effective framework through international cooperation to prevent and combat terrorism financing. Let me extend my sincere thanks and highest appreciation to AUSTRAC for their incredible contribution as well as assistance in organizing this summit. And also thank you for all participants here. May your contribution be translated into outstanding result in our united effort and common struggle against terrorist financing. I thank you.
Thank you, Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs Indonesia, for the remarks.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, now let us begin the plenary of the second CTF Summit with the first session that will be moderated by Vice Head of PPATK. And now we kindly invite Mr. Agus Santoso to proceed to the stage.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. So in this ministerial address, we will have our two speakers. One is Dr. Abdurrahman Muhammad Fakhir. Please come, Excellency, Dr. Muhammad Fakhir. And the second speaker, Honorable Mr. Michael Kinan, please. We invite both speakers to the stage. The first speaker will be Honorable Mr. Michael Kinan. Mr. Kinan was elected to the House of Representatives for Stirling, Western Australia in 2004, 2007, 2010, 2013, and 2016. Mr. Kinan was appointed as the Minister for Justice in September 2013 and July 2016, and was appointed as the Minister assisting the Prime Minister for Counter-Terrorism in May 2015. Mr. Kinan has also served in various roles in the Shadow Ministry, including Shadow Assistant Treasurer, Shadow Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations, and Shadow Minister for Justice, Customs and Border Protection, which he held from late 2009. In this session, Mr. Kinan will address the topic of understanding common threats and obstacles in anti-terrorism financing regime. So please, Mr. Kinan, the time is yours.
Well, good morning. It's very nice to be here for the opening of this summit in relation to counter-terrorism financing. Can I acknowledge my colleague, Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs from Indonesia, Fakir, Dr. Muhammad Yusuf from PPATK, and Paul Jeftovic, the CEO of AUSTRAC. Since the inaugural Counter-Terrorism Financing Summit in November last year, the threat of international terrorism has persisted, reaching almost every corner of the globe. We've seen attacks in Europe, North America and Asia, as well as continuing violence in the Middle East, but in particular Syria and Iraq. Earlier this year, we saw our Indonesian hosts tragically subject to an act of terror in Jakarta, which claimed the lives of 4 civilians and injured many more. Operationally, we have made significant progress in the fight against ISIL. It is under pressure in Syria and Iraq from our combined ground and air offences. It has not won a major battle in over a year, and it has lost significant amounts of territory. But this doesn't mean that ISIL has lost its ability to radicalise and inspire attacks elsewhere. We have observed an increase in the frequency and the severity of terrorist attacks globally. More significantly, we have observed individuals who are not known to authorities becoming quickly radicalised and then going on to carry out a violent attack. The challenge from international terrorism will be generational, and it will confront us for decades to come. The radical ideology propagated by groups such as ISIL using social media, together with other propaganda used to recruit young and impressionable minds, means that it is a long-term threat. Australia is not immune from this threat. Around 110 Australians are currently fighting or engaged with terrorist groups in Syria and Iraq. Since 2012, around 200 Australians have travelled to Syria and Iraq to join the conflict. These Australians are part of a group of 40,000 foreign fighters who have travelled to the region since the conflict began. Over half of these travellers are still in the conflict zone, and we know that at least 57 and potentially as many as 63 Australians are believed to have been killed as a result of their involvement in the conflict. Around 40 people have returned to Australia after travelling to Syria and Iraq and involving themselves in the conflict. The national security challenges that Australia faces are not unique to our country. They are global challenges shared by Australia and our neighbours in Southeast Asia. At last year's summit, our governments agreed to work together for the first time ever of a risk assessment for our region. And I'm pleased to say that after much collaboration between agencies, we have now delivered on this key recommendation. At this summit, we will release the first combined regional assessment of terrorism financing risk in Southeast Asia. This is not just a first for our region, it's one of the first regional assessments of terrorism financing in the world. I acknowledge the work of AUSTRAC and its Indonesian counterpart Financial Intelligence Unit, PPATK, who co-led this project with support from Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore and Thailand. The private sector consistently asks for more detailed and contemporary information on money laundering and terrorism financing risks. A shared understanding of risk maximises our ability to detect and disrupt key national security and criminal threats. This assessment builds upon Australia's 2014 Domestic Terrorism Financing Risk Assessment, which provided valuable guidance to the private sector on the nature of the terrorism financing threats that we face. The publication of that risk assessment and direct engagement with the private sector contributed to a 300% increase in the number of reports to AUSTRAC identifying suspicions of terrorism financing. By bringing together countries from Southeast Asia and together with Australia, we can develop a more detailed and nuanced regional understanding of the drivers behind terrorism financing risk. The regional risk assessment identifies areas we can continue to build capacity, such as self-funding by small-scale groups of lone actors, the cross-border movement of cash or value to fund terrorist activities, the misuse of at-risk non-profit organisations, and the provision of funding from external sources into the region, primarily from ISIL or its affiliates. This regional understanding will help us to identify, target and disrupt terrorism centre of gravity and show where preventative measures can be strengthened. The assessment tells us that no single country is impacted. Common borders, increasingly integrated economies, and the spread of a common radical ideology affects us all. If we look more broadly across the region and the impact of ISIL in particular, we have seen that almost 600 Indonesians are currently engaged in the Syria and Iraq-based conflict, and more than 70 Malaysian citizens have joined or attempted to join the group. The majority of these are associated with ISIL. Many international air travel hubs, including Singapore, Bangkok and Kuala Lumpur, are also used by ISIL supporters and recruits travelling to the Middle East. In some cases, foreign fighters from the region have returned home and are actively assisting in the recruitment and allegiance to this ISIL ideology. We continue to see ISIL interested in expanding its territorial footprint outside of the conflict zone, principally through the declarations of ISIL provinces, and ISIL wants to expand its presence in Southeast Asia and will look to territory in the region where it believes this might be achievable. Furthermore, proclaimed ISIL's leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi has described the establishment of an ISIL province in the southern Philippines as inevitable. We face a common enemy that has infected our region and is determined to undermine the harmony and well-being of our countries. The regional risk assessment highlights the dynamic and evolving terrorism financing risk profile we face. We must remain vigilant to ensure our legal frameworks are robust and equipped for both the government and the private sector with the tools necessary to combat terrorism financing. Earlier this year, I released Australia's first ever comprehensive review of our anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing laws. The review found, while our AML CTF regime is robust, there remains scope to strengthen our CTF regime and meet international best practice. The review's recommendations will better position Australia to shape a modern and efficient AML CTF regime and to address the challenges identified in the regional risk assessment. In particular, the review recommended improvements in the Australian Government's ability to share information with industry, which is a reflection that the private sector is a critical partner in the fight against terrorism financing. Reforms to Australia's ability to track and disrupt the cross-border movement of cash and value, which may be used to fund terrorist activities. And reforms to strengthen the regulation of stored value cards, which were used by the terrorists involved in the Paris attacks of November last year as a source of self-funding. The reforms arising from the review will be progressed in 2 stages. One package in the short term and a second package involving long-term reforms. Industry will be consulted on both the timing and the content of these packages to prevent regulatory failure. Australia is also developing a more sophisticated understanding of our non-profit and charity sector to ensure that the sector is not misused for terrorism financing purposes. And I'm pleased to report that much of this work is already underway. To ensure our agencies are equipped to combat terrorism, the Australian Government has invested $2.5 billion to support Australia's counter-terrorism efforts. This includes the provision of $20 million to better equip AUSTRAC to detect, deter and disrupt terrorism financing. Our efforts to encourage information sharing with the private sector have shown signs of success in the battle against terror financing. Over the last 2 years, we've seen a marked increase in suspicious transactions that business have reported to our agencies. In 2014-15, 367 reports were made by businesses where there was a concern of terrorism financing. AUSTRAC analysis also revealed other matters of terrorism financing concern that results in a total of 536 reports shared with partners. The financial year just gone has continued to demonstrate the commitment of reporting entities, with a further smaller increase in reports submitted where there was a concern about terrorism financing. This represents an increase from the 13-14 financial year, where 118 reports were submitted. AUSTRAC has a dedicated team producing financial intelligence analysis to better understand terrorism financing in the context of foreign fighters travelling to Syria and Iraq and financial support overall for ISIL. Intelligence has been instrumental in identifying terrorism financing mechanisms and entities that have been referred to national security agencies for investigation and disruption. AUSTRAC is actively monitoring more than 100 people of interest and keeps partner agencies informed about their financial activities. At the regional level, the work that we have done is supported and informed by the Regional Risk Assessment and the CTF Summit, which provide a framework for improved regional cooperation to counter terrorism financing. This is not all that we are doing. More broadly, we have introduced 5 tranches of legislation into the Australian Parliament since 2013 to tighten our laws and to ensure our law enforcement and security agencies have the tools that they need to keep Australians safe. We have supported countering violent extremism programs to intervene in the radicalisation process and to assist people to disengage from violence and reconnect with their families and communities. Counter-terrorism units at our international airports intervene in suspicious situations or intercept persons of national security interest. To date, these teams have found evidence of significant movements or attempted significant movements of large sums of cash. We are also planning to legislate post-sentence preventative detention to ensure terrorists who pose a threat to the Australian community will remain in detention. Our Counter-Terrorism Coordinator, Greg Moriarty, who you will hear from later on today, is also examining what lessons there are to be learnt from the recent attacks in Nice and other attacks by lone actors. Australia's law enforcement, intelligence and border agencies work together to deliver coordinated operational responses to terrorism. Our joint counter-terrorism teams harness the collective powers and capabilities of these agencies, and ensure joint investigations and operations. Since 2006, Australia has prosecuted 21 individuals and convicted 7 individuals for terrorism financing. Around 190 people in Australia are currently being investigated for providing support to either individuals or groups in Syria and Iraq, including through funding and facilitation, or seeking to travel there. The overwhelming majority of these are young men and women. 4 Australians have been listed for counter-terrorism targeted financial sanctions. ISIL is also listed for United Nations Security Council Al-Qaeda sanctions, which have immediate and automatic effect under Australian law. Despite our efforts, it is important to reflect that Australia cannot defeat terrorism by itself. We must work closely and in collaboration with regional and global partners to disrupt terrorism financing and to combat this threat. Large terrorist organisations such as ISIL rely on networks of facilitators enabled by criminals, corrupt officials and others co-opted or willfully blind to their endeavours, both within and outside their territories. These entangled networks span multiple jurisdictions and provide the capabilities to source, manage and sustain resources and assets. They are increasingly enmeshed with access to finance and technology using opaque business structures, numerous money value transfer services and remittance agents to mask the true nature of their financial transfers needed for these attacks. At the other end of the terrorism spectrum, lone actors and small terrorist cells inspired by extremist ideology present different yet still complex problems. Lone actors who are swiftly radicalised and unnoticed by relatives, friends or our counter-terrorism agencies can quickly prepare and conduct an attack with little or no warning. There are relatively low costs involved with lone actor and small cell attacks, and this makes the associated financial transactions difficult to detect. Their financial activity may resemble legitimate financial transactions, or worse, remain virtually indistinct when self-funded. This was the case with the attack in Nice, in which the perpetrators hired a truck to kill dozens of innocent civilians. That means our ability to share information with our partners is critical and an enduring challenge for any government. It is imperative that we maintain strong relationships to defeat this common threat posed by terrorism. I am encouraged by the work of participants leading up to this year's summit to address the evolving terrorism financing challenges facing our region and championing new collaborative approaches to deal with these challenges. The development of the regional risk assessment, the program to build tailored educational tools for the industry and the community, and the desire to foster stronger relationships are all positive outcomes to defeat violent extremism in all its forms. It is this commitment that forms the basis for a regional strategy to combat terrorism financing. And this raises the question about what a strategy to combat terrorism financing in the region looks like. Implicit is a regional commitment to strengthening our legal frameworks. Terrorist threats are not constrained by distance, deterred by national borders or rules, regulations and traditional barriers. Strong regional and international counter-terrorism and counter-terrorism financing frameworks ensure those involved in terrorism cannot evade justice by seeking safe havens in other countries and avenues for terrorist financing are impeded. A regional counter-terrorism financing strategy could also include greater and timelier sharing of intelligence and data to identify transnational networks and groups that operate in the region. The exchange of financial expertise is vitally important, and building regional capacity and knowledge would also contribute to a stronger regional response. For example, Australia continues to provide a dedicated program of engagement with Indonesia on counter-terrorism legal issues. This is producing tangible and significant mutual benefits in intelligence and capability exchange. A strategy built on these pillars will ensure we become faster, smarter and more agile, and we are able to get the right information to the right people at the right time. Unfortunately, we all know there is no silver bullet to combating terrorism or preventing the finance of their evil activities. Understanding terrorism, developing strategies, and overcoming obstacles to detect, deter and defeat their funding, resourcing and sustainment of their networks requires local, regional and global partnerships between the government, private sector and the wider community. We understand this threat and we know that it is not going to disappear quickly. But Australia remains committed to working with you all to stop terrorism and to keep our region and our way of life safe. Thank you.
Now we will have address from the Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia, Dr. Abdurrahman Muhammad Fakhir. Dr. I'm Fakhir, holds doctoral degree in Religious and Cross-Cultural Studies from University of Gadjah Mada, Yogyakarta in 2015. In October 2014, he installed by President Joko Widodo as the Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia, Working Cabinet 2014-2019. Please, Dr. Fakhir, the time is yours.
Yang terhormat Bapak Muhammad Yusuf, the Honorable Mr. Michael Keenan, Excellencies, Head of Delegation, distinguished delegate, ladies and gentlemen. A very good morning to you all. The evolving threats of terrorism continue to pose a serious threat to international peace and security. At the global level, the scope and nature of terrorist threats and attacks have intensified considerably. More than 32,000 people were killed by terrorists around the world in 2014. This is an 80% increase from the previous year, according to the 2015 Global Terrorism Index. That constitutes the largest increase on the record. Overall, since the beginning of 21st century, fatalities of terrorism have reached a staggering 9-fold increase. That includes attacks in major cities in Europe, Middle East, Asia, including the last in Tamrin in Jakarta. Our reading on this menacing phenomena is clear-cut. Terrorism is gaining momentum at an unprecedented pace with capability to launch sophisticated and deadly attacks, including the one in Nice that Minister Keenan mentioned. We must counter and combat this terrorism through concerted effort. Some say that acts of terrorism conducted by Al-Qaeda affiliated organization and network decrease. But let me underline that they are not at all waning. Instead, the increasing threat posed by ISIS and its affiliated foreign terrorist fighters mark a second wave of global war against terror, which constitutes a new global phenomenon of terrorism and is more dangerous and more lethal. Official report says 33,000 ISIS fighters, followers, and sympathizers from more than 100 countries reached Syria and Iraq. Some of them have returned to their respective home countries, capable of launching deadly strikes. Not only that, today we are also facing the imminent threat of lone wolf terrorists, which may not have appeared on our radar. The lone wolves may come from a background as ordinary as any other, but influenced by ideologies spread through the internet, armed with know-hows and financed with money provided by professional terrorists. The money really makes a difference between an ordinary kid with extremist tendencies to another who has the capacity and capability to commit terror acts. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, against this background, how are we as international community going to stop them? One way to do this by putting an end to their lifeline, financial support. We must combat and eliminate the financing of these serious threats. We must enhance the financial and economic system not to create conducive conditions to terrorism. In short, a stronger and more effective strategy to deal with terrorist financing regimes must be devised at all levels and scopes, including in our regions. Hence, this is timely and relevant summit. Before discussing CTF in the region, let us have a glance at the UN Global Counter-Terrorism Strategy, especially in guiding principles in countering terrorism. Those principles are: terrorism is the most serious threat to international peace and security. Terrorism cannot and should not be associated with any religion, nationality, civilization, or ethnic groups. Terrorism is aimed at the destruction of human rights, fundamental freedoms, and democracy, threatening territorial integrity, and destabilizing legitimate government. Accordingly, establishing a CTF strategy in our region must be aimed at: one, addressing the condition conducive to the spread of terrorism. Two, preventing and combating terrorism. Three, building states' capacity. And four, ensuring respect for human rights for all and the rule of law as the fundamental basis. On our part, Indonesia believes that such regional CTF strategy must be combined with a balanced approach, combining hard and soft approaches. Hard approach means strengthening legal framework and law enforcement. In this regard, Indonesia is now reviewing and amending our law on counterterrorism, among others, to meet the challenges in dealing with FTFs, and conducting law enforcement joint operation between the police and military, like in Poso. The result is extraordinary, as the last month, the leader of Mujahidin Indonesia Timur, Santoso, or Abu Wardah, was killed in combat. Conversely, soft approach entails effort through religious and cultural approach, involving community and religious organizations. It aims at amplifying, mainstreaming the voice Islam that promotes moderation and tolerance by providing counter-narratives to the radical ideologies. We are also diversifying this approach with de-radicalization and counter-radicalization programs. We rehabilitate convicted terrorists before reintegrating them into the society. In this specific area of CTF, Indonesia's authority managed to identify and deal with 4 categories of terrorist financing through internet and cyber theft, namely direct solicitation, e-commerce, exploitation purchasing, hacking fraud, and fake charity funding. Cope with the changing modus operandi, including kidnapping, bank robbery, as another source of terrorist financing. Asset freezings of 39 bank accounts amounting more than 2 billion rupiah, as well as those of 383 suspected individuals and 77 entities related to terrorists and its organization. We take note that most of them are non-Indonesian nationals. And last, strengthen contribution to effective international cooperation, including through capacity building such as training. Here I'm pleased to share that since 2004 until last June, Jakarta Center for Law Enforcement Cooperation have run 821 law enforcement programs, including counter-terrorism, involving nearly 20,000 participants and 4,603 trainers from 70 countries. And lastly, intensify national training course on CTF. Distinguished delegate, as previously stated, the lifeline of these terrorist groups lies in their financing. The future CTF strategy in the region should be aimed at reducing and eliminating terrorist threat, among others, by one, preventing terrorists from using common methods to raise funds or using the financial system to transfer money. Two, reducing the resources available for propaganda, recruitment facilitation, training, and support of families, thus making it harder for extremists to mount attacks. Three, targeting the raising and movement of money and disrupting the funding agencies. Four, using financial intelligence and financial investigation method with a view to supporting counter-terrorist investigation. And four, implementing asset freezing, which prohibits anyone from dealing with the funds or economic resources owned, held, or controlled by a designated individual or entity. Here comes our challenge. The CTF strategy involved the cutting-edge and revolutionary digital information and communication technology. And let's not forget, terrorists are also using new technology. Inter alia, to misuse social media to broadcast the radical and extreme ideologies, to misuse the internet to collect terrorist funds, and to misuse the financial system to distribute terrorist funds. In this regard, we, the authorities, have no other alternative but to stay alert, resilient, and always be innovative with the new technology. Ladies and gentlemen, apart from its proximity to advanced technology, CTF is also closely linked with financial industries. They are active in more than one jurisdiction. Therefore, another challenge for relevant authorities is to catch up with the industry's fast-moving interaction and intensive cooperation. In this regard, meeting among anti-money laundering, countering terrorist financing authorities from different countries shall provide a forum to set international standards and develop best practices. We have seen it through the Financial Action Task Force or the Asia-Pacific Group on Money Laundering. Given the above conditions and challenges, we propose the following measures required to establish CTF strategy for our region. First, create regional risk assessment on terrorist financing because our region needs adequate assessment system to determine financing risks within countries or region. Second, strengthen collaboration among financial intelligence units to combat terrorist financing through the financial intelligence consultative groups. Third, develop educational tools on terrorist financing risks to raise awareness in private sectors, academics, and civil society. Finally, I must underline the primacy of renewed political will and open dialogues and addressing these challenges through cooperation and collaboration among financial intelligence units. Our objective is clear: to achieve common understanding on this issue, to establish regional risk assessment system, and to devise appropriate CTF strategy in the region. I thank you.
Thank you very much for Mr. Kinan and Dr. Fahir for your addresses. Ladies and gentlemen, may this ministerial address inspire us and give direction for our future works and collaboration to develop a strong safety regime in our region. Please give big applause to our speakers.
Thank you for all speakers and moderator.
The next agenda is the second session of the plenary, which will be moderated by Group Head of Reporting Transaction PPATK. We kindly invite Ms. Judith Leona to proceed to the stage.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Selamat pagi. My name is Judith, and I'm a Group Head of Reporting Directorate in PPATK. I'm honored to be a moderator in this second session. So, in this second session, two honorable speakers, which are Dr. Muhammad Yusuf, the head of PPATK, and Mr. Paul Cevtovic, the CEO of AUSTRAC, will deliver their vision on how we all can collaborate in countering the terrorism financing in the region. So, I would like to call Dr. Muhammad Yusuf to proceed to the stage, and Mr. Paul Cevtovic. The first speaker will be Dr. Muhammad Yusuf. He was born in Pendopo, South Sumatra, pursuing his education from primary school in 1917 until obtaining a doctoral degree in law with cum laude from the Faculty of Law Pajajaran University Bandung in 2002. Starting his career as a civil servant in District Prosecution Office in Ujung Pandang, and having his assignment in PPATK since 2008 as the Director of Law and Regulations Bureau and appointed by the President of the Republic Indonesia in 2012 as the head of PPATK. Considering his excellent knowledge of law, money laundering, and terrorism financing, Dr. Yusuf has actively become a spokesperson in many domestic and international events. Besides that, Dr. Yusuf is well known as a team leader of book writing specialized in money laundering and terrorism financing. The Law Enforcement Agency has found the book are very useful while using it as a reference to eradicate money laundering in Indonesia. So, please, Dr. Muhammad Yusuf, to deliver your vision.
Thank you, Ms. Judith. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, especially for my colleague, head of IU, as the participant for this summit, and also Mr. Paul Jeftovic. I would like to deliver about the strategic opportunities for regional financial intelligence in this forum. Seems to me that the purpose of this CFT Summit is to bring together experts and leaders from around the globe to work together collaboratively among 25 countries to identify, to understand, and counter threat posed by terrorist financing and foreign terrorist fighters, and to foster shared commitment on counter-terrorism financing effort. Now, if we talk about the scope of this summit, the summits would bring the implementation of Sydney Communique through 4 working groups. The first one, working group on the general risk assessment on terrorist financing, which had been presented and discussed on the first day. From the RRA, we have successfully mapped the risk on terrorist financing in our region. And the second working group in financial intelligence information exchange, from the working group, there had been the signing of the term of reference of FICG, 5 countries in the region. In addition, AUSTRAC and PPATK will be the co-chairs for the first year. And the third working group on regional education tools and terrorist financing, there has been intensive discussion between PPATK, AUSTRAC, and the academia of the topic of educational tools. Furthermore, there has also been the attempt to establish training need analysis to meet the needs from different audience. And the last working group on information technology expertise, this working group tried to identify the risk from emerging financial technologies to be misused for the terrorist financing. Now I want to talk about the scope of this summit. The scope of these summits bring to implementation of Sydney Communique that I've been mentioned before. And we talk about the future models for collaboration. In terms of the collaborative framework to endorse the cooperation among the stakeholders, firstly, I propose the need to have the multilateral engagement with regional focus, for example, by conducting analysis exchange program involving more FIUs in the region. Secondly, the need to perform open sharing of intelligence through secure online communication, or SOC, for example, by using the channel of Egmont Secure Web. Thirdly, we could also develop enhanced intelligence information and exchange intelligence information through the platform of Financial Intelligence Consultative Group, which I have mentioned before. Lastly, we could establish task force that consists of FIUs from our region. The task force will be dedicated to manage with specific issues. For instance, the cross-border cash movement issue. This is one of the problems that we are facing now. New payment system, the NPOs, and foreign terrorist fighters who came to Syria or Iraq. This CTF Summit is a perfect event for us to discuss and agree on what kind of collaboration that can be done by us in order to address the risk of terrorist financing. Your active participation during the discussions could bring us closer to establish the set collaboration. And the vision models seems to me it can be done by us. I believe it. I think that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Muhammad Yusuf, for a clear presentation that gives us the model for us to collaborate to counter the terrorism financing. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Paul Cevtovic to deliver his remarks. The time is yours, sir.
Rather than the podium, I thought I might just deliver it from here. And I'm conscious of time and given the late start this morning, so I'll tend to abbreviate my delivery as much as possible so that we can get on to some of the important working groups. But Bapak dan Ibu-Ibu yang terhormat, selamat pagi. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, and welcome to the 2016 Counter-Terrorism Financing Summit. I'd like to especially thank my colleague and co-host Dr. Muhammad Yusuf, a close friend and a dedicated champion of fighting terrorism in this region. I want to thank our Indonesian colleagues and the Indonesian government for the warm welcome and accommodating us here in Nusa Dua. I'd also like to welcome many colleagues from around our region. I want to recognise the Asia Pacific Group on Money Laundering, a group that is often under-resourced and under-budgeted, but supports many of the countries in many different ways that are here at this plenary. I'd also like to welcome my Russian colleague Dmitry Feoktistov and thank Russia for making an extraordinary effort in joining us here, sharing their experiences and helping guide our future strategies. I'd also like to acknowledge our two colleagues from Pakistan, and I want to extend to them our sympathies for the recent attacks in their country. And on that note, I'd like to ask that you all join with me in paying our respects to those who have lost their lives at the hands of terrorism, and ask that we observe a minute's silence in their memory. If we'd all be upstanding, please. Well, we've just heard from the Minister for Justice, the Honourable Michael Keenan, and the Vice Minister Fareki from Indonesia concerning the extent of the global threats that we face collectively. They've confirmed that terrorism is not a localised issue, but instead has transnational impact and influence. Last year, we saw an estimated 11,774 terrorist attacks around the world, killing, as mentioned earlier, in excess of 32,000 people. Since the last summit, we have seen the atrocities around the world, including Baghdad, Dakar, Florida, Nice, as well as in Jakarta, and of course more recently in Pakistan. But what is it that is common in all these terrorist attacks? Aside from the existence of a perverse ideology, it is the use of finances in one form or another. Every single terrorist attack needs to be funded. Whether, as in Nice, that is the hiring of a large truck to indiscriminately use as a weapon, whether it is the purchase of chemicals and explosives, as we saw recently in the attacks in Baghdad, killing more than 325 civilians, or whether it is the travel by radicalised actors to Syria and Iraq to fight for ISIL. Every single one of these acts has and needs a money trail, the quantum of which has become irrelevant. Every one of these acts has some sort of financier. At some point, an individual has committed to the funding of a terrorist act. Now, we've all heard for some time the concept of following the money. It is, without doubt, a valuable approach to investigating all sorts of crime, including serious and organised crime groups, narcotics and corruption. But it is an approach that of itself is only part of the answer. Our approach to discovering, understanding and preventing terrorism financing must be more holistic, agile and innovative. As we know and has been mentioned, the world is changing at an ever more rapid pace. Emerging changes in technology means that we will see more change in the next 10 years than we have in the previous half century. This creates significant opportunities for terrorist groups to radicalise individuals, plan attacks and further create fear in our communities. I'm sure the wicked irony that groups such as ISIL, Al-Qaeda, Jamaat Islamiyah, Lashkar-e-Taiba and others who preach, dictate and raise support for their medieval philosophies and beliefs through the internet is not lost on any of us. But the changing world is something we shouldn't fear. It is something we need to embrace. The opportunities seized by terrorist groups are also opportunities which we must identify and harness more quickly and more effectively into the future. As groups like ISIL exploit technology to spread their propaganda, we too must better exploit technology for our own means. As a global community, we need to ensure our agencies can collaborate multilaterally, securely and in real time on terrorism financing, complex multinational investigations and of course critical incident responses. We must also work to ensure that our domestic legislative frameworks are contemporary, for example ensuring our legislation is technology neutral to take into account new and emerging products developed by the private sector. This will need to balance the confidentiality of industry's commercial interests and the privacy of all our citizens. It also means we need to support and promote a culture of trust and sharing. We must be willing to overcome the traditional philosophy of need to know to instead focus on a primary responsibility of sharing. We must also do more to harness our relationships with industry, the commercial and private sectors. The financial sector is, in my view, our first and sometimes our last line of defence to the prevention of financing of terrorism. Collaboration is paramount to countering terrorism financing, as no one entity, whether from the private or public sector, can solve this problem alone. It is this need for collaborative responses that was a key part of and a genesis for the Counter-Terrorism Financing Summit in Sydney last year. It is no secret that across Southeast Asia and in Australia we face a variety of terrorist threats, often facilitated or enabled by criminals, bribery and corruption. It is also no secret that the implementation and maturity of AML CTF frameworks and capabilities will understandably vary across our region and that vulnerabilities and gaps will be quickly exploited by any or all of those threats. We have all worked hard to share information and intelligence and foster coordinated approaches. AUSTRAC and the PPATK over the past 14 years have forged a close and collaborative relationship thanks to the support financially by our respective governments. We now conduct regular analyst exchanges on various cross-border crime types, including terrorism financing, child sexual exploitation, serious organised crime, to mention a few. And we have in place here in Indonesia 2 AUSTRAC offices. The approach we have taken to combat terrorism financing is serving us well. But in the face of the changing world, the ability of Australia, Indonesia and other countries to respond to these threats is being challenged. We must therefore come together to collaborate, innovate and to collectively address the risks of and disrupt terrorism financing, as well as those who enable and facilitate their money trails. The inaugural summit held in Sydney last year was the first step in this journey. Reflecting back on the communique that was issued at the first summit in Sydney in November, I posed the question of how are we performing? If we measure success in the terms of building relationships and improving our understanding of the risks that we face in our region, I would say we have excelled. This is underpinned by the production of the first regional risk assessment on terrorism financing, led by Indonesia and Australia, together with Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore and Thailand. To collaborate and prepare a multilateral assessment of this quality in only 9 months is an outstanding achievement. There were many sensitivities, there were many complexities, there were many differences in the way data and information is collected. None of these obstacles were deemed insurmountable. The level of goodwill by all countries was quite simply amazing. The assessment brings real value to our work by generating a stronger understanding of the unique challenges faced within our region, particularly on self-funding, which is often at the heart of now lone wolf attacks, as well as the movement of funding into the region from groups such as ISIL. It also identifies opportunities for us to continue to strengthen our regional responses by improving our visibility of suspicious fund flows into the region, as well as monitoring and disrupting cross-border terrorism financing activity. As appropriate for a regional assessment, it is not a measure of the success or otherwise of each respective jurisdiction, but is a baseline analysis upon which future cooperation can occur. It was also part of the genesis for the first summit, and that is that we often talk about collaboration, and it's often a bemusing question as to what do we collaborate on first, given our finite resources and our commitments to fighting terrorism in so many different places. This regional risk assessment gives us a framework upon which our collaborative efforts can be focused. But beyond the success of the regional risk assessment, a financial intelligence consultative group has been formed, and it will provide the mechanism to share critically important intelligence and expand on the work that AUSTRAC and the PPATK Analyst Exchange Program has done to date, and I'm very proud to say including all ASEAN FIUs into the future. We now have an international community of experts comprising Indonesia, Australia, Thailand, Malaysia and the Philippines to build connectivity and remove technical barriers to sharing and analysing intelligence. And for the first time, we held an industry forum this week to build trust and partnerships between government and the private sector and contribute to the development of tools that educate and assist industry address terrorism financing risks. This is an extraordinary effort in just 9 months, and we should be proud of what we have collectively achieved. But we cannot and must not rest on our laurels. We must constantly work to improve our response, our relationships and our understanding. For if we don't, we will be overtaken by the rapidly changing world that we live in. Further, it is not just about talking about the action that we're going to take, but it's about being vigilant in our commitment to operationalising good policy and laws. We must convert FATF outcomes into operational successes, specifically the prevention and disruption of terrorist acts. Looking ahead, I want to reaffirm Australia's commitment for this summit in the future and delivering the outcomes we will agree to over the next 2 days. As I said last year, I would like us to collectively ensure that this summit is recognised for its innovative, courageous and forward-leaning outcomes, and not just for reaffirming the extent and gravity of the threats and risks or confirming our status quo in the context of our responses. With that in mind, we must use the regional risk assessment to guide our next steps and focus our efforts on the highest risks. The assessments provide the foundation which will lead to real opportunities to actively disrupt terrorism financing before it happens. This is what we will measure ourselves in 2017 upon. We must also take time to consider change over the horizon that will influence terrorism financing and position ourselves to exploit those opportunities. We must also continue to welcome our industry, business and community partners into the conversation and response to terrorism financing. By joining with industry, think tanks and academia, we can enhance and maximise our effectiveness in identifying, preventing and dismantling terrorism. I also want to lend my support to building a coalition under a regional CTF strategy that consists of 4 critical pillars against which we will be assessed: intelligence sharing and operational cooperation, capacity building and technical assistance, ensuring our legal frameworks are contemporary and effective, and community and industry collaboration and education is maximised. We have the opportunity to be the strongest regional coalition that sets the global standard in best practice in countering terrorism financing, underpinned, of course, by strong partnerships and a commitment to outcomes. We are on the path to realising this, but we must ensure that we remain committed for the long term. We embrace change as an opportunity, and we are willing to embrace and diverse as a coalition of partners as we possibly can. I'd like to finish by issuing some challenges for us all. That by the next summit, held in 2017, we will have developed and implemented a regional strategy on terrorism financing that encapsulates collaborative, holistic responses to the threats facing our region. That we take away from this summit opportunities where we can be bold and innovative in bringing government, industry and the broader community together to prevent financing of terrorism into the future. That we are more willing to share information and intelligence to disrupt cross-border terrorism financing and support operational exchanges. I ask you all to dare to conceive a time in the near future where multiple regions around the globe are maximising our collective resources and capabilities in the global fight against terrorism. It is only if we have the courage to commit to real outcomes as a collective we will triumph. Once again, welcome to the second CTF Bali Summit.
Thanks, Paul, for your thought of how all of us can collaborate, not only talking but action, and need a goodwill, a commitment, innovative approach, trust between us. So it left to us how we can do that. So this is the end of the session. Let us give a big applause for the 2 speakers on all of us.
The Honorable Mr. Muhammad Yusuf and the Honorable Mr. Paul Jeftovich, please remain on the stage because there will be official delivery of the Regional Risk Assessment on Terrorism Financing from RRA team from Indonesia and Australia. We'd like to invite Chief RRA Project from Indonesia, Mr. Ivan Yustiavandana, and Chief RRA Project from Australia, Mr. Alistair Sen.
And also we'd like to invite participating countries to come to the stage to witness the launching. From Malaysia, Mr. Kamaruzaman, and from Singapore, Ms. Yolanda. From Philippines, Mr. George Watan. From Thailand, Ms. Fiat, and from Indonesia, Mr. Inyoman Sastrawan.
Mr. Ivan will deliver to CEO AUSTRAC, Mr. Paul Jeftovich.
And Mr. Alistair Stein will deliver to Head of PPATK, Dr. Muhammad Yusuf. And please remain for the picture taking.
Mr. Muhammad Yusuf and Paul Jeftovich, please remain on the stage because have a seat for RRA acceptance speech. First remark is from Dr. Muhammad Yusuf. The floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Indonesian Financial Intelligence Unit or PPATK, I greatly appreciate the hard work that has been done and dedicated by all of the participating countries on making this regional risk assessment or RRA. I acknowledge that RRA's result is a very important fact-finding, which mark the common concern among the countries within Asian regions and Australia on the risk and threat of money laundering, specifically the risk of terrorism financing. The work undertaken by this assessment has fostered and tightened a genuine spirit of cooperation and collaboration among participating countries. I believe by using this RRA, we have the guidance to endeavor our effort on combating terrorism financing in the region. Moreover, if we have and implement the future models collaboration that I have mentioned before. Once again, thank you very much.
Thank you. And next remarks is from Mr. Paul Jeftovich, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pak Yusuf. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to first thank the contributing countries for their commitment, their courage. As you will see in the regional risk assessment, there are many sensitivities. There was a need for frankness and honesty in putting forward the challenges that individual countries face to give us the baseline upon which we can understand as a region the threats that we are facing and where we must collectively invest our limited resources and time. I want to thank the working group, particularly our Indonesian PPATK and my AUSTRAC staff for their coordinating efforts in bringing the region together and the production of a world first in this regional risk assessment. But, and I underline the word but, the assessment is the first step. We will not be judged in time to come on the quality of the assessment. Instead, we will be judged on our response to what the assessment has told us. And when we leave Bali tomorrow afternoon, we must collectively be clear on our commitment and how we will respond to the risks and threats that have now been prioritised for us in the regional risk assessment. I endorse the risk assessment to you all. Thank you.
Thank you for all speakers, and you may return to your seat.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the next agenda is the third session of the plenary, which will be moderated by Deputy of CEO Operations AUSTRAC. We kindly invite Mr. Peter Clark to proceed to the stage. Okay.
Okay. Okay, we would like to inform you before we enter the third session, we'd like to have a coffee break for 30 minutes, so we will come back after that. Thank you.
masih live. No, I think no problem. We can live. No problem. Yeah, keep live. Okay. Ya, tahan nanti. Enggak, maksudnya kartunya ambil aja. Kart yang A. semua. Kayaknya saya nggak bisa pakai ini lah, ini apa kopi di tak aja. Ya, ini ya, ya. Bisa, aku juga rekam juga. Tapi aku kan ada logonya soalnya. Kalau di aku rekam ada logonya. Enggak, tutupnya ini. Itu lebih berat dulu. Kemarin kan kemarin nggak pernah. Kan nggak itu.
Harusnya enggak.
Kopi aja kalau oh enggak, saya nggak bisa, ini nggak bisa capit saya. Ini tak kasih kopi kita. Ada lengkap. Oh di sini juga ya. Enggak, saya kan mau kalau kopi saya harus capit ini. Kan nggak berani saya capit. Makanya ini aja capitnya saya bawa. Oh ya kopi kita kasih. Ya. Oh ya. Tak gitu. Iya. Kalau saya nggak begini nggak berani. Tak lagi. Kita kita lagi kopi. Iya. Nggak tahu yang mana. Oh nanti. Ntar tak cek dulu ya yang mana yang stop.